Hello, everyone. Today I will be presenting my social problems analysis presentation. The topic that I chose was racial and ethnic inequality, and my name is Paige Hintz. In the bottom right corner here, I have included a quote by Martin Luther King Jr. that says, "Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." And I thought this was relevant because not only is Martin Luther King Jr. a symbol for racial justice, but he is also a symbol for the beloved community. What is racial and ethnic inequality? According to Bowdler and Harris 2022, racial inequality is the unequal distribution of resources, power, and economic opportunity across race in a society. Racial and ethnic inequality creates disparities amongst marginalized populations impacting multiple systems of their lives. These disparities may include, but are not limited to, wealth, education, employment, housing, health, rate of incarceration, and mobility. So let's talk about the historical context of racial and ethnic inequality. The extent of the historical battle to gain racial and ethnic equality is far beyond the contents that this presentation could ever cover. However, let's explore some portions of history to provide context. Krisenak 2023 has provided a summary of some of the inequality that Native Americans have experienced throughout U.S. history. So I've put together a timeline of Native American history based off of Krisenak's article. Between 1830 and 1850, the Indian Removal Act of 1830 was enforced to remove Native American tribes from the southern regions, relocating them to land west of the Mississippi River. Krisenak also mentioned that the land that the tribes were relocated to resembled internment camps. In 1876, in response to the removal policy, the Lakota tribe fought the U.S. Army, turning into a series of battles called the Great Sioux War. In 1890, the U.S. military gathered the Lakotas to disarm them at Wounded Knee in eastern Montana. 250 men, women, and children of the Lakota tribe were slaughtered. Krisenak stated that Wounded Knee became infamous as a cruel example of the extent that the United States would go to control the tribes and force them to accept the reservation policy. In 1887, Congress passed the Dawes Act, giving 160 acres of land to tribes to be used for farming to allow tribes to become more self-sufficient. In 1924, Native Americans were granted U.S. citizenship. I found it a bit shocking that it took all the way until 1924 for Native Americans to be recognized as U.S. citizens. In 1934, Franklin Roosevelt passed the Wheeler-Howard Reorganization Act, returning some land to tribes. This act allowed Native Americans to create their own businesses. In the 1970s and 1980s, Native Americans began gaining some more autonomy, expanding some healthcare and educational opportunities. This oppression has spilled over into the modern day, leaving with some lasting effects, and the Native American population still struggles with some disparities. So let's review what life is like for Native Americans in the modern day. 1 in 3 Native Americans live in poverty. In 2022, the unemployment rate for Native Americans was above the national average. Crowded living conditions and access to limited health care led to higher mortality rates for Native Americans during the COVID-19 pandemic. Life expectancy for Native Americans is 73.7 years compared to the national average of 78.1. Tribes living on reservations have an even lower life expectancy as mental illness, drug use, food insecurity, and suicide continue to remain as a challenge in their communities. Another piece of history that I chose to examine was the history of Georgetown University. Georgetown University is located in DC, and it is a predominantly white school with a long history of racism. So let's take a look at this timeline. It is a visual illustration that the Georgetown Voice created in 2021. So in 1838, Georgetown was a part of the sale of 314 enslaved people. It wasn't until over 100 years later that the university admitted its first Black student. In 1976, the first Black professor started teaching at Georgetown University. And then much later on, all the way in 2016, the African American Studies Department was created. So the conclusion is that going forward, Georgetown has an obligation to work towards greater race consciousness on campus. Georgetown University appears to be stuck in time with less progress towards racial and ethnic equality than many other universities. Here are some reasons why, according to the Educational Board of the Georgetown Voice 2021. The majority of the university's professors are white. The university lacks scholarship opportunities for BIPOC students. In the 2019 to 2020 academic school year, only 6.3% of the university's students were Black. The national population at that time was reported as 13.4%, while the DC population was 46%. So, based off of these statistics, it does appear that there was a lot less acceptance at the university for Black students. It appears that the white students have an advantage because they are more commonly accepted into the university, unfortunately. The Georgetown Voice discussed some different ways to intervene with the social issue of racial and ethnic inequality at their institution. By following such procedures, the goal would be to create a more inclusive environment for students of color and Indigenous backgrounds. So, some different interventions might look like some of the following: creating more scholarship opportunities for non white students, mandatory racial justice education for the student body, greater support for BIPOC students and scholars, mandatory syllabi reviews to make sure that professors are teaching about racism, create an Indigenous studies program, listen to the voices of Black students and faculty who are advocating for improvements. And one thing that I did not mention so far was what BIPOC stands for. So that is an acronym for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. How is racial and ethnic inequality impacting communities? Some of the topics I'm going to discuss in the following slides are human rights, equity, and justice. I also chose to include this Venn diagram image at the bottom of the slide to help display the intersectionality of human rights, equity, and justice. So let's talk about human rights. While analyzing the Native American history, as well as the history of Georgetown University, the Declaration of Human Rights came to my mind. Article 2 states that everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political, or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. And I pulled this from the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, which was created in 1948. Reviewing the Native American history timeline provided examples of rights and freedoms that were stripped away from Native Americans. The Native Americans were victims of stolen land, and they were also denied a right to citizenship in their country of origin until 1924. The history of Georgetown University is an unfortunate example of an institution that displays the lasting effects of racism. To this day, there are still unequal educational opportunities to non-white applicants. In our previous courses, we learned about how the lack of educational opportunities can correlate with lack of educational opportunities put people at risk of staying in poverty. These pieces of history are clear-cut examples of how race has acted as a barrier against rights and freedoms. In relation to the beloved community today, it is the job of social workers to defend the rights of all people. Social workers are to remain committed to advocating for historically marginalized populations, fighting for equality and justice for all. The topic that I'm going to discuss in this next slide is equity. In one of our previous courses, MSW 600, we learned thoroughly about the third competency for social workers, engaging in ADEI practice. While the United States has progressed greatly over time, it is still not an even playing field for people of all races and color. Georgetown University provides an example of this inequality, as there is an unequal distribution of scholarship opportunities extended to non-white applicants. Bowdler and Harris 2022 stated that large educational disparities coupled with racial discrimination in the labor market and other factors led to pronounced differences in economic security across racial groups. Equal educational and employment opportunities are crucial for improving equity amongst all. In addition, opportunities to further education often create better employment opportunities when race is ideally left out of the picture. So I thought this quote was very relevant. In one sense, I felt like I couldn't word it better myself. We know that educational disparities put people at a disadvantage, especially marginalized populations, and that can affect their income. In this next slide, I'm going to talk about justice. Social justice refers to the fair treatment of all, fair distribution of resources and opportunities. A socially just society would be a society that has no place for racism. Unfortunately, systemic and social racism still prevails and affects people to this day. In the NASW Code of Ethics 2021, one of the ethical values is social justice. Social workers should work to challenge social injustices and pursue change to create social justice going forward within society. In particular, social workers should advocate for vulnerable and oppressed populations. Social workers can be a part of creating racial and ethnic justice by ensuring equal access to resources, opportunities, services, and more. Without racial and ethnic justice, marginalized populations will continue to face intersecting challenges and other social problems, such as poverty, inadequate healthcare, and so much more. Systemic racism has led to many disparities for far too long, which is why social workers must remain committed to racial and ethnic justice. While there is still a long way to go in terms of achieving racial and ethnic justice and equality, progression has been made through the creation of policies and laws protecting non-white individuals. As such policies are created, the goal is to prevent further injustices from repeating in the future. So in this next set of slides, I wanted to talk about social policy. In my opinion, this is where it gets very interesting. So in my search for laws that promote anti-racism, I did find this law in North Carolina. It's called the North Carolina Equal Employment Practices Act, Anti-Discrimination Policy Protections for North Carolina Employees. This act was created to enforce public policy in North Carolina to safeguard the right to employment opportunities without discrimination of race, religion, color, national origin, age, sex, or handicap. The NCEEPA does not provide employees with a private right of action. However, the statute's policy can be the basis for a common law claim of wrongful discharge in violation of public policy. This is a quote by Caulfield, 2021. There are time limits, but charges of discrimination can be made, leading to investigations of violations. And who is covered by this law? Employers covered must regularly employ 15 or more employees for this to apply to them, which I thought was a bit interesting because I feel like all employers should be covered by this, but it's better that this policy is in place than not at all. Discrimination and denial of employment does not allow places to utilize their full capacities for advancement and development. So that is one reason why this policy was created, because by allowing diversity into the workplace, companies are able to reach their full capacity and potentially be more efficient. Employees can be wonderful from all races and background. So this slide is more of a reflection on some of the information that I was finding while searching for active 2025 anti-racist U.S. policies. I struggled a lot with finding active policies on the federal level. So I have some thoughts about social policy and transformative social work in the modern day. What do the recent rollbacks of anti-racist policies mean for transformative social workers? I came up with some Thoughts about the negative impacts that these recent rollbacks have on individuals? Individuals of color are protected less from discrimination in various settings, becoming an issue that intersects with human rights, equity, and justice. People of color may be feeling isolated. There is a lack of opportunities and representation, and systematic racism can and has been increasing, leading to a rise of discrimination. What can transformative social workers do about this? Transformative social workers can advocate for more anti racist policies, empower oppressed populations, maybe through counseling, educate leaders about the harmful impact of racism, and assist clients with finding resources that may not be easily available to them. I did find a social organization working to improve racial equality in North Carolina. The acronym for that organization is CREED, CREED. So CREED stands for the Center for Racial Equity in Education. CREED is a North Carolina-based nonprofit organization that was launched in 2019. This organization is working to achieve racial justice and help remove systemic racism from education. I included a screenshot of their mission that came directly from CREED's website. So the mission says, with the vision that one day race will no longer be the primary predictor of educational outcomes, CREED actively pursues racial justice, facilitates better educational practice, and inspires institutional and systemic transformation of the education system. Through research, coalition building, and technical assistance, CREED works to close opportunity gaps for all children in P20 education by centering students and families of color and closing the knowing doing gap in the field. The knowing doing gap refers to what educators know and what they should actually be doing. So, educators should use their knowledge about racism to implement different ways to improve inclusivity in their educational environments. If there are ways to reduce racism, they need to take those steps to do that. According to CREED's 2023-2024 impact, CREED was able to achieve a lot. They were able to gather representatives of North Carolina's HBCUs at the Legislative Building in Raleigh for the second annual NC10 HBCU Advocacy Day. Students and faculty members were able to talk to their elected officials about issues that their campuses are facing. They also launched the Learning Differences Playbook, a tool used for educators to help bridge the knowing doing gap. One thing that I really liked about the Learning Differences Playbook is that not only was it designed for educators, but it was also designed to include parents. And it also talks about culturally responsive practices. CREED gathered educators across North Carolina where many topics were discussed, such as equity and inclusion. CREED introduced a new campaign called Black History Year in efforts to empower people to still celebrate Black history, even after facing different attacks on education regarding Black History Month. I think this is a really great campaign, and I truly hope that it gains more awareness. CREED gathered quantitative data about school funding and school safety, and they also hosted their first education policy chat at Davidson College, where there were discussions about how policy has begun creating the resegregation of schools. They discussed what this resegregation means for students and how equity advocates can approach new policy shifts. So I think CREED is a really great organization, and I hope to watch them thrive and grow as we continue to move forward. This is the list of references that I used throughout this PowerPoint presentation, and I just want to say that I appreciate everyone who has listened to this presentation that I have completed and worked very hard on. I hope you all have an amazing rest of your day. Thank you.